Hey now, I realized that it's been too long since I brewed a nice dry Irish stout, so I'm going to remedy that today. Now this particular recipe, I have worked on a few different iterations of it and found something I really like with a great balance of chocolate and espresso notes. I find too many commercial stouts out there are really sort of one-dimensional, just coffee or whatever going on. This one I find just has a little bit more nuance going on with it. Super delicious, so come along for the ride. Now in the grist here, buried somewhere at the bottom, I've got a bunch of really nice, just English pale ale malt. That's going to be my base, and we have 79.5% of the grist as that. And now I've totally mixed this up here. I do have some chocolate malt, and that is 3.5% of the grist, and that's going to give it those nice chocolate notes. And then you can also see some of the flaked barley that I have in here, and I've got 6% of that, and that's just going to kind of help soften and give some creaminess to this particular beer, which I really, really like. Now, you might be wondering, where's the roasted barley? Well, here it is, right here. I've got this set aside. You're going to see what I do with that here in a minute. But first of all, let's run the rest of this here through my malt mill. So I'm going to take all the malt except for that black roasted barley and start to run it through my Monster Mill 3mm Pro. I really love this mill. It makes short work of this grain. There we are, all crushed up. Now, onto the secret move with the roasted barley. Now that last 11% of the grist, this black roasted barley, is actually going to be put into the food processor here. And because I have like 940 grams of this, I'm just going to split it up into 2 batches. It's going to be loud. So after about 30 seconds of that, you can see I still do have some chunks of the actual grains here. However, a lot of it has been absolutely pulverized. Obviously, that's something that you don't want to do with the majority of your malt. That's not a typical practice, but this, trust me, leads to some awesomeness when it comes to the black roasted barley character of this beer. All right, so I've got my strike water all heated up here, and I'm ready to mash in. Now, while I'm using my fancy brew stand here, this is a recipe that would lend itself well to a wide variety of brew systems, including brew in a bag, cooler mash tuns, anything like that. So don't let the big brew stand sort of throw you off in that regard. Now, I'm going to be mashing in here, first of all, with the grain that I ran through the Monster Mill. I'm just going to stir that up really well. So now that I have most of the malts in there, I'm just going to take this roasted barley. I'm going to sprinkle it across the top of the mash bed here. You can see I've got my little espresso machine cleaning brush. I can use that to get this out. I definitely had to use this brush on that plastic food processor to get most of this powder out of there. Now the idea behind getting this up on the top is that we don't necessarily want too much of this to get down into the rest of the mash and to get through the bottom into that false bottom there, because that might not hold all of this. So by having this up on the top, sitting there, we're going to get hopefully a ton of flavor out of that roasted barley, that powdered roasted barley here, without it screwing up our actual recirculation. Now that I've got that ready, I'll just get my lid on here and start the actual recirculation of the mash. All right, so we've just begun the recirculation here, and I've got this mashing at 66.7 degrees Celsius or 152 Fahrenheit, which should just be a nice middle ground mash temperature for this beer. After 1 hour of mashing, you can see how all of that black roasted barley is all nicely saturated with water here. We've got this extremely black, opaque wort happening here. And now it is time to mash out, so I'm just going to send this up to 75 degrees Celsius or up in that 168 degrees Fahrenheit range. Hold it there for a little while, and then we'll be ready to sparge. If you have a different sort of brew system, this is where you can figure out if you actually jack your temperature up prior to running off into your kettle. So after mashing out there and holding it for around 15 or 20 minutes at that higher temperature, I am ready to actually run off into the boil kettle. So we'll just change around some of these lids here and get going. So now I'm fly sparging, running off into that mash tun. And in just a minute here, I'm going to kick on this other pump and start running off into the boil kettle. Look at that delicious wort coming out. Fantastic. Aim on. So here's our grain bed. It's looking beautiful. Most of that
really crushed black roasted barley stayed up on top, which is exactly where I wanted it. We're not worried about mixing that in through the mash as much as we are with other grains, because as it's not malted, there's far less by way of like starch conversion and sugars and whatnot. So staying up on top was a great way to do this. We're looking for color and flavor adjustment through that grain. So we've just hit a boil and I'm nervously watching it here. I'm getting prepared to add a lot of hops to this. I have, it was like 9.6 grams of a 9.2% alpha acid Phoenix hop, which goes really well in stouts. I just used up the rest of what I had there, and then the remainder of this is Fuggle. It was 145 grams, yep, that's why there's so much here. 145 grams of a 4.4% Fuggle, and between those, it's giving us the 45 IBU that we're looking for in this particular beer. With this recipe, I'm very nervously going to start to add them here because this is looking pretty volatile and I don't want to have a big boil over. I didn't quite kill the flame, but I got it about as low as it would go. Managed to get all those hops in there, so now I'm just going to adjust this, and we thus begin our 60-minute boil.
Alright, so after that 60 minutes, just going to kill that boil. I've got my stainless spoon that's been hanging out in here the whole time just to keep it nice and sanitized. Going to give this a whirlpool here for about 30 seconds or so, and that's just really going to allow me to get a nice cone of all that hot matter right in the center here, and then when I go to pick it up with the dip tube down there and run off, it's going to leave almost all of that behind, which is really nice. So after I give this a whirlpool, I'm just going to throw the lid on, let it sit for about 15 minutes or so, and then I can be prepared to run off. And I'm just in the process of running off that wort through the plate chiller and into a couple of carboys. I already have carboy number 1 already, and we are just filling up the second one here. And looking through the haze, you can see that real cone of hop and break material that I was talking about there, that whirlpool helped avoid picking up. Reading below the meniscus, we come in with 1045 as an original gravity on this Irish Stout, which is awesome. So now both of these carboys are up at my intended pitching temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually agitate them here. I don't need to oxygenate them per se, but I do want to give them some extra oxygen here just by aerating. I'm just going to rock them here like this for approximately 1 minute each. With that lower original gravity of 1045 and the healthy yeast pitch that I'm giving, I don't need to worry about getting a diffusion stone and an oxygen tank and everything set up here. But about 60 seconds of rocking like this will just get some extra O2 into solution just to help with that propagation once I pitch my yeast. All right, it is time to pitch this yeast. Now here I've got a 3.7 liter yeast starter of the good old tried and true Wyeast 1084 Irish Ale that I grew up right from Slant, and it's extremely healthy, vigorous. I just pulled it out of the incubator, ready to rock here, and I'm just going to split it between the two carboys here, which is always a fun process. Fortunately, my carboys were a very similar volume, just with that wort in there, so I should be able to balance this out pretty well. And now with that yeast pitched there, I'm just going to set up my blow-off or carboy hoods here and blow-off tubes and all that. Person could use almost any kind of, there are lots of different options here for yeast that would work really well for this. All kinds of UK yeast strains would be awesome. You could go with liquid yeast strains, you could use dry yeast packs, all of that. There's not really a wrong answer to this. Let's get these thermal wells in here. I've got everything all sanitized. Here, Star San. Here we go. And of course, get these blow-off tubes onto here. Into my bucket. And just feed those temperature probes down into those thermal wells. So nice and protected. And now with everything all set up here, we begin to wait. And 12 hours later the next morning, we are at High-Krausen here, fermenting away quite happily. And we're sitting at that 68 degrees. So another 12 hours in, we're looking at 24 hours since pitching. Whoa! When I said High-Krausen before, I lied. This is real High-Krausen. Almost hitting the danger zone here. Woo! After 3 days here, activity is definitely starting to die down. I now have these ramped up to 70 degrees. It was 69 yesterday, 70 today. And I'm just going to hold them at warmer temperatures here just to kind of help ensure full attenuation.
First attenuation test on this Irish Stout is coming in at 1016, which is definitely high for style, but I guess we'll see what the actual beer comes out at.
So I'm just in the process of pressure racking these beers here using CO2 and pushing directly into corny kegs. Now, once these beers were starting to show signs of actually dying down with fermentation a little bit, I increased the temperature, getting as high as 72 degrees Fahrenheit, holding it there for about a week just to make sure I was getting as much attenuation as I could. And then after that, just sort of let them cool down and let that yeast flocculate out.
And for a finishing gravity, just reading below the meniscus, we come in at 1009, which is a really good finishing gravity for this beer.
After transferring into that keg, I just toss it into the keezer and let it sit there for a little while just to drop out some of that yeast. With this particular beer, because it is so dark, I'm not super worried about clarity, even though I believe this is quite clear. However, it's really just to drop that yeast out, just to have a cleaner tasting beer in the finished product. Either way, we're on tap. Let's have at it here. Now, the keg that I have on tap here, I just carbonated this, and you can see the process I use for finding my beers, carbonating them, all in the brewing playlist on the channel. This keg I intended to have some bottles of as well, so that I could either enter in competition or give away as gifts. I will take the other keg and get it on tap here with beer gas so that I can use my nitrogen faucet, and I'm really excited about that. However, this will also be very delicious. Now, of course, I do have this more lowly carbonated than a lot of the other standard beers that I have on tap here, but let's try it out. Now, with this, even though it's a fairly simple beer, there is really a lot going on as far as the characteristics go. First of all, we've got that English Pale Ale malt in there, and that just contributes, it's just sort of a light toffee and sort of gentle nuttiness to the beer. With the chocolate malt in there, we have this dark chocolate character as well as almost hints of cocoa nibs happening. And with that black roasted barley just being pulverized in the food processor and sprinkled across the mash bed, we've got this really rich black roasted character. We're getting all sorts of espresso notes and some really nice roasted bitterness that complements the hopping that we had in there, getting up in that 40 IBU range with that mid 40s original gravity. It's just a really, really nice balance. And of course, with the flaked barley in there, we're getting a really nice smoothness, which I find incredibly delightful when you have the sort of higher bitterness of the hops as well as the grainy bitterness coming out of the roasted malts there. It's just a really nice way to kind of smooth it over, make it incredibly drinkable. Of course, also having that lower carbonation really helps with that as well. This one is incredibly delightful when I have it on that nitrogen faucet as well. So I can't wait to kind of move through the rest of this keg and then get that one on tap. That's a really fun process if you are able to get yourself a nitrogen faucet and some beer gas. It's a really cool way to present certain beers. So there you have it, just this rich, delectable, creamy, roasty, tasty, and quite complex for the style, dry Irish Stout. Really delicious. If you do give this a whirl, please let me know how it turns out for you. And until next time, keep your beers at 11.